Hi, welcome to Getting Started with British Research in the 19th Century. This is the first of three 20-minute sessions. This session will cover the census records. The next session will cover civil registration or statutory registers. And the third session will be a case study putting the two record types together to solve genealogical puzzles. I'm Amy Harris. I'm a professor in the history department at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. I also serve as the Family History Program Coordinator, so I direct the Family History Bachelor's Program at BYU. My historical training is in British and European history since 1500, and then I have an accredited genealogist credential in English research. So I spend a fair amount of my regular work life dealing with 19th century British work or British research, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you learn a lot over these three sessions. I should start with some general introductory comments about what it's like to do research in 19th century Britain. There are advantages and disadvantages no matter where you do research. The advantages in this period for census records are that we have a largely complete set of censuses 1841 to 1911 with a high level of precision and detail. Well, not detail, but precision. The disadvantage is they aren't quite as detailed as you might be accustomed to if you've worked in American, Mexican, or Canadian censuses. They have less information, but they're readily indexed and accessible in most cases. The other thing I need to introduce is what do I mean by Britain or British? So there's an embedded PowerPoint presentation in this video. And so I'm going to click through the slides and then I'll come back and you'll see me for a minute and then come back to some more slides. So I'm just going to share the screen so that you can see the slides. There we go. So I'm going to be talking about Britain in the three countries that occupy the island of Britain. So that's Scotland, Wales, and England. We won't talk about Ireland today, whether the Republic of Ireland or Northern Ireland, because Irish research in the 19th century is a completely different animal. It involves completely different sets of methodologies, largely due to record destruction. Many census and vital records were destroyed in the 1922. In the Civil War, there was a bombing in the archives. So that's a different methodology. And if you're part of the Irish diaspora, typically that work has to start in the country the people immigrated to and then work back to Ireland. So that's a different set of concerns. So we're going to just stick with England, Scotland, and Wales today, the countries on the island of Britain. Okay, so let's just talk about the census overview. I will minimize this for you so it doesn't block your view. The census, as you probably know, is taken every 10 years. It's taken on the one in the British countries, starting in 1801. There's a reason, though, why I will start in 1841, and I'll get to that in a bit. They're readily indexed for England and Wales and digitized Ancestry, FamilySearch, Find My Past. They're also indexed on freecen.org.uk, as in free census. So that is a free index, even if you can't get to the images that way. Scotland is also indexed on those sites, but the digital images are only available from scotlandspeople.gov.uk. An interesting thing about the British census is it's supposed to reflect where people slept on the census night. There was a particular census night, unlike the American census that is dated at the top because it could have taken anywhere from April to June or different times in the year. These are supposed to reflect one particular night and where the person slept. There's a couple problems. One is, how does the householder interpret that rule? And two, how does the enumerator interpret that rule? So we should back up and talk about how the census itself was taken. About a week before census night, the census enumerator or the census taker, they were initially the overseers of the poor, would pass out the forms, the household forms, to the householders or leaders of an institution. And they were to complete it reflecting who slept there on that particular night. And the night ranges from census to census from late March to early June. And you can look up the dates online, they're easily accessible. And then the census taker would come back and fetch the completed returns. he would then enter that information into his enumerator books and throw away that original household return. So all the digital images you see of the censuses from 1841 to 1901 are the enumerator books. So they're already one step removed from the original information written down by your ancestor. The 1911 is great because the enumerator books and the original household returns survive. And I'll show you what that looks like later. So just keep that in mind, that the data might have discrepancies because it's already a copy. There are a few returns, a few hundred returns that survive for various places of those original household returns. And some historians have compared those to the official enumerator books to discover all sorts of discrepancies. People's names spelled differently, their ages change, their occupation change. Sometimes it seems like the census taker thought he knew better than the person did themselves for how they would describe themselves, and so he would change it. And sometimes he might change all the spellings of the name because the householder wrote them in a local dialect nickname version, and he transferred them all into standard English. Then I know of one case in Shropshire where the original household return lists a couple of guys who were working in the mines that night. So they weren't sleeping anywhere, they were at work. But it lists them as somebody who typically would sleep in that household. And the enumerator book does not contain information on those two men because technically they were not sleeping there that night. So technically they should not be in that household. The problem being they're not going to be counted in any household. So in the official returns, they don't exist. We only know about them because the household return survives. It's very rare for the household return to survive though. But that just gives you a sense of how there can be small discrepancies or large discrepancies in that case that can creep in. So one of the big pieces of advice I give when using the census is search for everybody, their whole lifespan in the whole family group, not just a direct line ancestor, their siblings, their parents, their spouse, their in-laws, whoever it is, that fill in all the gaps you can and search for that individual across every census they could be in. This should be a first step in 19th century research. Sometimes you can't find them in a census, particularly for women if they married and changed their surnames, or there's some discrepancy in the indexing that makes a person hard to find in a particular census. But once you have more research completed, you might have clues that you can come back to the census. That's fine. But as a first step, make a good faith effort to search all the censuses for everybody, because there'll be slight variations on age, occupation, birthplace, and you want to be able to put all those clues together to prove you have the same person and to get clues to prove their connections to their own ancestors. One other thing to be aware of is family terms are more flexible. They are, particularly in the earlier part of the 19th century, things that kinship terms we use that we have very specific meanings for in the sort of English-speaking Anglo world, like sister, brother, father, can mean various things. It might be sister-in-law, half-sister, stepsister, or full sister. The same with a parent, or adopted. They're not as precise in those terms. They're more flexible. So just keep that in mind, that somebody might be listed as a stepchild or an in-law. Sometimes they say in-law when we would call it a step relation. And sometimes they might not. So you have to be careful with that data. And remember, relationships are listed to head of household. So members of the household could be related in various ways, but the relationships, according to the rules of how the information was supposed to be entered, are supposed to be how that person's related to the head of household. I'm sure you've seen returns before where there might be elderly parents and an adult child with their spouse listed, and they don't follow that rule, right? They'll kind of list the older generation and the younger generation as two heads of household, right? So you have to interpret each one in its unique context, but in general, it's supposed to be relationship to the head of household. You're welcome to open a browser if you have access to Ancestry or FamilySearch or Find My Past to look at their indexes and look at the images. I'm not going to go through every year. I'm going to hit a couple of highlights on some specific things and then talk about some search strategies. Okay. So what you need to be aware of first off is the 1841 is the first broadly genealogically useful census for Britain. They started taking the censuses in 1801, but the household returns were given to the enumerator, who completed statistical tables and sent those into London, and the original household returns were destroyed. The enumerator books did not have people's names and relationships, so they're not as genealogically useful. there's a few returns that survive, a few original household returns that survive for the 1801, 11, 21, and 31 censuses. And I'll talk about that at the end because there is a database we're working on to gather all those all in one place and fill that gap a little bit. But generally speaking, on the major websites, what you're going to start with is the 1841 census. It's also the most limited. It does not list precise relationships, it does not list marital status, and it does not list precise birthplaces. And to make things extra complicated, it rounds ages. So anybody under the age of 15 is supposed to list their precise age. And anybody older than 15 is supposed to round their age down to the closest 5. So I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. The 1851 is the better beginnings for us. It has precise birthplaces. And if you've dealt mostly with North American censuses, this will thrill you because it's going to list a parish or a town and a county where they were born. If they were foreign born, you won't be so lucky. So if you have an Irish person living in England, it'll just say they're from Ireland, or a Scottish person, an English person living in Scotland, it'll just say they're from England. But if they're enumerated in the country they were born in, you're going to get the town or village or parish and the county name. You also get marital status and precise relationships and precise ages. This is true going forward after 51. After 61, they start adding a few more details about physical disabilities and employment. The 1911 is the most recent one available. And as I said before, you have digital images in color of both the original household returns and the enumerator books. The 1921 census will be released in 2022. The 1931 was destroyed by fire. There was no 1941 taken. Britain was fighting for its life against the Nazis then. But to compensate for missing 20 years of census records, there is the 1939 register, and it is digitized and available on Find My Past. It has redactions for information about living people, and they update it several times a year and remove redactions once they know people have passed on. So I'm just going to show you a couple of images here and then talk about a couple of search strategies. Here's the 1841. I know someone in 1841 who was a few weeks shy of his 20th birthday. And so he's recorded as a 15-year-old because technically he was 19 and they were supposed to round down to the closest 5, and that rendered him 15 instead of 20. That's a cautionary tale about how you have to make sure when you're searching the 1841, you keep in mind ages could be 5 years younger, up to 5 years younger. Here's the 1851. You can see more detail and the precise birthplaces over there on the end. 1861, the same. The far right column is about whether someone's blind, deaf, or what mute or dumb. And then here's the 1911 beautiful color census. Household returns. You get to see your ancestors' handwriting and signature, assuming they're the ones who filled it out. It could have been a census taker if they weren't literate. The advantage genealogically is this is also the census that will tell you how long someone's been married and how many, for women, how many children they had and how many were living. This return doesn't show any of that because all of these women had never had children and had never married. But it's incredibly useful to know that a woman said, well, I had 6 kids and 4 are living, and you have no record of those other 2 children. Now you know you need to go find births and deaths for 2 additional children. And then here's the enumerator book for the 1911. So it's great that you get both. And then here's the 39 register showing redactions and the browning of cellophane tape on the document. Okay, just a quick couple of minutes on search tips. Work from the known to the unknown. Start where you have good information about your family that you know is solid, and work to the closest census to that. Do not work chronologically through someone's life if you don't have a lot of clues about their earlier life. So if you have a death in 1902, start with the 1901 census and then work backwards and forwards from there, depending on what your questions are. I would search one census at a time and take careful notes about what you searched for and found in that particular census. Don't search all the censuses all at once on Ancestry, for example. Search the 1851, then the 61, so forth, and keep notes, because this will make it more efficient, and it'll keep you from getting frustrated when you can't remember, wait, which detail was in which census. Extract the census data or download the image so that you can have it to refer back to. If you can't find them, my initial thought is always there's just an indexing problem. Maybe the indexer couldn't read the handwriting very well. And so they're likely to be there, but you might just have to trick the algorithm to get them to reveal them. So you can use a question mark in place of any individual letter. So say the surname has an L in it, but sometimes gets indexed as a T. So you could put a question mark in that space instead to call up either version. And you can use an asterisk at the end of a word, of a surname, for example, and it will call up any surname that starts with those beginning letters. So give it 3 or 4 letters and then an asterisk, and the algorithm will call up any surname that starts with those 3 or 4 letters, no matter how it ends. I would never check exact spelling. There is no such thing. In the 19th century, really, it's highly phonetic, regional, and then it's gone through 2 filters by the time you're searching it. So I would never check exact spelling. You can check exact place name and then filter by a particular surname, for example. I know I need Mary Jackson, born 1820. I know she's supposed to be living in this parish. I can't find her. I also don't know if her parents are there. So I'm just going to search for all the Jacksons born, in this tight time period in this very exact place. And then that gives me 25 or 30 people to look through to see if I can find Mary quickly. Those are just some quick, easy tips. I hope they're helpful. And if you're interested in the pre-1841 censuses, we are putting a big database together at Brigham Young University. It's ebc.byu.edu. And you can come and check and see if your ancestors are some of the lucky ones that survive in the pre-1841 returns that have survived this long. So right now we have over 40,000 people in there. We'll probably end up with 500,000. So just keep checking back and see if one of your ancestors is in the database. It's free to the public. You can just come to the website and search it. Thanks for being here. Hope to see you in the next session. Make sure to check out other RootsTech presentations in the meantime. Take care.